share these things. And I think, particularly in this year of COP26, it's really, really important for the industry, but also the world, just to get change.
So we're all here to talk about sustainability. Talking about the last 3 years is an interesting one for Cardrona, because we're actually only in our 5th year of production. We are new to the whisky scene. Here in New Zealand, the history of spirits is not short, but it has absolutely seen a bit of renaissance and is starting to boom again. So it's a really exciting time in New Zealand for whisky. I think we're possibly in that position where, because we're still new, we had these opportunities in setting up and choosing our location that we could make a few sustainable decisions, well, in view of sustainability, but there are still so many that we could make. Location is so important. Your proximity to water. We happen to be sited on a farm, so our draft truck comes, backs up to the side of the building. There's an auger going out the side of the wall, and it never touches a sealed road. It just takes the draft off to the cattle and deer in a neighbouring farm.
Yeah, that sounds pretty similar to the setup we've got at Nc'nean. We're a young distillery too, in our 4th year of production. Exactly the same setup on a farm. We have our own, spring water, and we have cattle that can take the draft. I think that's pretty common in the industry, to have, animals close or near, but on site or close, that take waste products. So yeah, we've been able to build in sustainability from the beginning, which I think has helped us a lot on the road to, saying, okay, we've got this far. How do we get ourselves to that net zero position?
Yeah, and we're much the same. Again, a young distillery. We're 6 years old, so much of muchness. Again, background farming, family farm for over 400 years. So again, we're on the farms. The field to bottle approach that we adopted when we started was a very natural thing to do, because the crops are outside. So it's growing what we want to distill. And then in terms of anything else we need, we can grow them in polytunnels or anything else. So everything's there, and it's just continuing that journey, because, as you said, Sarah, and Amy, the same, it's a case it's evolving all the time. It's something that's probably been instinctively built in, but actually it probably wasn't necessarily sustainability when we started. It was more field to bottle. It was more about farming and becoming distilling. So I think it's something that actually all of us have in common in terms of that farm approach to distilling.
We're a bit further away from our raw materials. Well, our barley, especially. Barley's all grown on the East Coast primarily, and we're almost as west as you can get in Scotland. So we do have a bit of distance between us and the farm, but we do also source organically, which, in terms of carbon footprint, the difference is negligible, whether it's organic and whether it's not. But there are definitely sustainability benefits from having organic barley, for sure.
We're just lucky we're on the East Coast where it's nice and sunny. One of those fortunate things you could have. That was a good choice, because our family were from the West Coast originally, moved to sunny East Coast, so growing barley is really easy. Sorry.
No, I was just interested to know if organic barley farming was something that was on the rise. It's hard to source or difficult to source. It still feels very sort of niche and not experimental, but it doesn't feel like it is the done thing here in New Zealand for right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely there's definitely a smaller amount of producers that grow organically than don't. So we have to be. There isn't a huge pool from which we can source, and that really comes down to who our maltsters work with, and there are only really 2 maltsters that source from organic farms. So we kind of go where the barley is.
We're similar, although we wouldn't go organic fully. We'll minimise what we're doing. Again, we're commercial barley growers, so we'll grow for the maltsters, for the other distilleries as well, because that's what we've done for centuries. So we're probably minimising the crops, so more regenerative agricultural practices, but actually not as far as organic, because actually it's fairly difficult for us to do exactly that just now. But again, everything evolves over time, and I'm sure things will continue to evolve.
And sometimes regenerative agriculture can do more for the planet than
absolutely. Totally agree. It's not like one or the other. There's a real grey area where regenerative and organic should overlap. Sometimes they don't. So if you're doing the regenerative side, it's in terms of certainly enhancing soil productivity and reducing carbon. It's really, really important.
it's where we've been growing a lot more legumes, or particularly peas. So the peas is giving a nitrogen fix. It's obviously taking carbon out of the atmosphere as well. So, as a farmer with my farming hat on, that's saving us in terms of artificial nitrogen, in terms of actually money, let alone anything else, but actually getting that free nitrogen fix works really well, because obviously soils are incredibly important. So, it's where I guess all of us are in touch with that farming environment we live in, and that's where some of the other distillers may not be as close to sourcing as they are, because you see the impact.
How close are you to your barley, Sarah?
Not at all for now. We, in starting the distillery, did not have the option of purchasing malt from New Zealand that was of a distiller's quality. So we're currently bringing it in from the UK on the water, which has surprisingly a somewhat comparable footprint to the number of trips it takes in a truck up and down New Zealand. It's grown in South Canterbury predominantly, or further south, but often malted in the North Island and then brought back down to Cardrona. It's not necessarily a forever plan for us. We will explore our options as we go. So I guess it's important in being a country on the other side of the world to a lot of, yes, raw materials, but actually just equipment. I mean, when we started, there wasn't anyone building, there's no coppersmiths, there's no one working with making mash tuns. So we've sought out the best that we possibly can from around the world, and then when we can go local, we absolutely do.
I don't think that's dissimilar to anyone else. We're just lucky you're in Scotland, home of Scotch, so you're kind of going, it's all there. But at the same point, there'll be other things that you need to just make up as you go along, and I'm sure, Nc'nean were the same in terms of coming in, and there'll be things that you've adopted or just done first principle and just moved on that road straight away, because you can. Yeah. And make choices that are good for the environment, good for sustainability.
Yeah. Absolutely. And future proofing's a huge one for that. The size of our plant could definitely handle steeping water. I know it is our CEO's dream to have an on-site malting one day, a malting plant, and we'd love to look at reusing that water as opposed to just discarding of it. There are definitely potential and possibilities along the way.
I think in terms of the industry changing, I think always going local. I mean, that's a trend anyway. Sarah spoke about it there. I think in terms of local sourcing where they can do. I don't know if the industry, and I'm talking Scotland just now, sources as much barley locally as they possibly could do. Again, with my farming hat on, I wish they did source more locally, and I think they should do, because obviously that cuts down the environmental impact. But we're still importing a lot of barley from elsewhere. So for me, that's an issue that I'd like to see addressed.
I'd like to see more distilleries attempt a carbon footprint, to be honest. I think it's really interesting. I've just completed ours. That's kind of our big project for this year is to produce a footprint and a sustainability report the same year that we've released Whisky. And it's super interesting looking at actually where your emissions come from and where the biggest source of emissions are, and then how you can tackle that going forward. So, I would think that in terms of like the whisky industry as a whole, attempting to decarbonise, I think the first step has got to be measuring how much carbon you're emitting, and then going from there. But certainly like supply chain, I think is a big thing, and it comes back to your point about sourcing as local as you can, because that will reduce your emissions. But if it's local, you've got more chance of influencing people up and down your supply chain because of their proximity to you. Asking questions of suppliers like, where do you get your materials from? Do you have any idea of how much energy you use? All of these things I think are really important. We've been asked the question of whether or not we think consumers are being influenced by sustainability and their buying decisions. And I think that also resonates within the industry. Like, we have a responsibility and we are buyers of products and services, and it's our job as well to influence, other people.
I think the consumers are definitely on a journey with that, and I think actually the pandemics maybe accelerated that even more in terms of sourcing and people looking for where things are coming from, because actually their buying habits have probably become more localized during lockdown, and in the various countries of the world perhaps that's happened. I think also COP26 is obviously happening in Scotland this year. So there's a real global focus on that. The regime change in America has helped, I think. But obviously talking to the Chinese, so if the Chinese and the Americans get together and start to really force this issue and actually, as you said, map it down and actually what are the actions we need to do rather than talking about it, I think this year could be a very critical year for industry, supply chain, and ultimately consumers demanding or looking and willing to pay more for sustainable products. Because we've certainly seen people coming to us because, you know, we're doing the first rye scotch for the first time in 200 years, and they're willing to pay extra for that because of its uniqueness. But it's also scoring well in terms of the reviews. But also, you know, we do climate positive gin and vodka. Obviously, that's not a whiskey conversation, but those products are very much in demand and with some of the best retailers and some of the world's best hotel chains. So the demand is there because people are looking for it and they're willing to pay more because potentially they're drinking less but drinking better.
I'd echo that. I mean, we've had such a lot of positive feedback from consumers from the release of the whiskey. It's really encouraging to see actually that people really get it, and they it's not like that they're buying into it; it's that they believe in it. You know, it's really nice to make those positive purchasing choices, I think.
Which is so important when you are selling your product, is that you're selling them something that they believe in. It's something that they want to connect with, and sustainability is definitely something that is, and absolutely. And buying local, you have that sort of sense of ownership that you're supporting your local distillery as well. I think that's been a huge thing that we've seen in New Zealand breaking out of quite short lockdown comparatively, was that people hit the roads and were visiting, were exploring their backyard, and were really getting on board. And I mean, the wine industry is miles ahead here in New Zealand in terms of engaging with organic, biodynamic, minimal intervention. It's only a matter of time, really, before whiskey drinkers, I think, are looking to that in their bottle as well.
Yeah, I think like anything else, it evolves. It becomes a norm. If it's becoming a norm elsewhere, it becomes a norm. You know, I remember when we started having a conversation with quite a few chefs, and one in particular. It was about, you know, you've got all the sourcing on your table, but actually some of the alcohol that you have on your table, you couldn't possibly say where it comes from and what its, you know, what its provenance is, what its traceability is. You know, why don't you have that? And I think that's evolved now. Well, I know in that particular place it has done as well, and I think that will continue to evolve. You know, alongside food, always that pairing. I think there's always a comparability there as well, where food is possibly always ahead of alcohol. I think it is, but I think that may be changing.
Just an engagement more with the process too. I think people are wanting to understand how spirits are made more so than they ever have before.
There is a difficulty as well with achieving like a really high level of sustainability and also achieving a premium feel. And certainly Scotch is like known for being quite a premium product. And if you think about sustainability in its rawest form, like we're looking at reducing back packaging or taking it away, or lightweighting bottles, and those things aren't necessarily synonymous with a really premium high quality product. And so it's almost like changing people's perceptions of what is quality in whiskey, not just the way it looks and feels, but actually what's inside the bottle.
I think that change will happen. It will evolve. I think it will evolve fairly quickly because, you know, as you say, bottle weight or anything else, you've been kind of taught that that's really important, but actually it will change if people understand. So there's an education piece there, I think.
Yeah.
And it's where, going back to the industry, some of the bigger players potentially have a bigger role to play in that, because obviously they've got the budgets to do the education. So actually that's often the role they can play in terms of responsibility, because, you know, if you look at certain big players, they are the majority of the industry. So if they're educating people in terms of that change and the reason why it's happening, I think that can only be a good thing for everyone. I think it's been one of the upsides of us doing rye whiskey is that we now have rye casks. So actually we can naturally put that back into the cycle by using the rye casks for maturing our barley whiskey or a single malt whiskey. So there's things like that evolve by design, actually, because it was one of the upsides. Or, you know, we're growing oak trees just now, but it's a 50-year long-term project. You know, if you want to do something long-term, and ours is a legacy business, you're growing oak trees, it takes 50 years. So I won't be here when the oak trees mature, but hopefully the next generation want to do things like that. And you could be making casks out of those oaks. You may do something differently, or you might just leave them in the ground and go, fine. You know, they're there as part of our natural environment. We put something back in terms of farmers.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic that barrels in whiskey production can be used not just once, but be suited to a different style of spirit in terms of how much the oak gives, and that they can be recharred and repurposed. We have quite a close relationship with a local brewery. They're more than happy to take on barrels and use them and bring them back to us. Like, I think barrels have a long life in the whiskey industry, which is fantastic.
I've been looking at, where our barrels come from, Kentucky, and how long they're used for with bourbon, and then obviously how long we use them for, and then what we're going to do with them, in 10 years time, 15 years time, when they've come to the end of their natural life with us. How do we repurpose them? Can we work with local breweries? Can we upcycle them? Can we sell them as cheese boards, as furniture, planters? There's so many ways, I think, to reuse a lot of materials that distilleries come in contact with. It's just about being innovative and crafty half the time, not just in like the creative sense, but in like the kind of, how are we going to tackle this waste problem? How are we going to reuse these materials? There's tons of opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll all use the draft. I think Sarah spoke about before, draft straight out to the cattle or the pot ale back on land or anything else. One of the things we are doing is we're using draft for tables and for coasters and everything else. So we've got a whole bunch of them going into, we're just speccing up because we're just about to open our distillery experience and speccing out the tables that will have draft tabletops. So very creative people have put those together. It's a great and simple idea, but it's not rocket science. Once you've thought of it, you go, actually, that's a really good idea. The simple ones are often the best, but it's using that creativity, as you were talking about before, and it's a case of going, how else can you do it? Because piece of wood's a piece of wood, and actually it could be used for so much. But also, if it's been imbued with so much beer and whiskey and whatever other spirits you've kept in it, it's probably got an amazing smell, and there's a great history with it as well. And I think there's a responsibility there. And I think, the cask people that are using casks and working with casks all the time have a great affection. A bit like furniture in a way. They're creating these amazing pieces of furniture, as in the cask itself, because it can be repurposed for almost anything.
And it's great that we're in a position to accept casks that would be considered spent to another industry. They don't need to be wasted. They can be repurposed with maturation of spirit, which is fantastic.
Yeah, because I think obviously the history's there of that, and Scots always been canny, and I'll include the New Zealand people there as well, as many of them are Scottish too. That you're going, actually, we've got a free source of wood here, particularly coming from the States, because you're kind of going, well, actually, they're not going to reuse them, whereas we can, and it's amazing how these things evolve. But there's a first circular economy thing happening a long time ago. I don't know exactly when that first started, but imagine the amount of wood that's been moved from the US to Scotland in terms of whiskey. It's incredible.
We can do our best to get all these cattle that we're all feeding with our draft back onto our plate, then there won't be any complaints from myself either.
No, it's funny. I'm based in Edinburgh, and I'm heading up to the distillery today and really looking forward to seeing our new recycling plants, because they arrived the back end of last week. We've taken a whole load of new Highland cows. So we've got our Arbikie Highlanders have arrived in terms of draft recycling. So I think anything like that is amazing. That it's nice and simple, it's tangible, and I think with people coming onto our site for the first time with a distillery experience, it lets children in particular, or whoever, understand how simple recycling can be, and actually simple steps like recycling that barley and how that's natural manure going into soils and everything else. I think we're looking at doing a sustainable tour in terms of one of the elements we've got, and it's actually explaining an awful lot of that, because as both farmers and distillers, it's incredibly important for us to educate people on that. And we'll do our little bit. I'm sure you guys will be exactly the same.
Yeah.
And yeah, we take tours already, and it is always a joy when people understand that the bulk of your water use, although high, is mostly borrowed. You know, it's running through condensers, not coming into contact with spirit, so it can be returned to the river or the spring or the bore supply that it comes from, and it picks up heat energy, so it can be used in. For us, with underfloor heating, it gets plenty chilly in the Cardrona Valley. We're in the snow sometimes in winter, so that takes the edge off a little bit. And seeing sort of their faces light up at realizing these opportunities to recover heat, and that water can be repurposed is always a real joy of the tour. So you've got that to look forward to.
Yeah, I totally echo that. You know, like people that come to the distillery, it's my job when I'm, you know, during the summer months to take guests around the distillery and to explain what we're doing and why we're doing it. A big part of that is looking at the pond that we've got, the water pond, which recycles all of our non-processed water. So this is the water that goes through our condensers, and it reduces our water footprint by 80% because this water never leaves the plant. You know, it goes from one place to another, it cools down naturally and goes back into the distillery to take out heat from the spirits. So it's really, sometimes like the really simple ideas that have the biggest effect in terms of, you know, your overall sustainability or your water use or whatever else.
And I think that audit you were talking about, Amy, as well, in terms of just knowing where you are and where you want to get to and making those incremental steps, I think, in terms of the industry as a whole, and all industries, to be fair, is just keep making lots of changes that way, and you can just improve what you're actually doing. You know, we'll work on lots of different things. We're very lucky to have a very talented master distiller in terms of Kirsty, and she's always working on different things. You know, it's amazing, and the team themselves. You know, I think people get it, as you were talking about, in terms of consumers, but also if your own team are really into it, there's always something else that can be changed or adapted or improved, and that kind of continuous improvement, I think, is something that the industry is definitely doing in terms of whiskey, and I think it's definitely happening, but like anything else, it's a case of going, right, guys, can we do it a bit quicker? It's where we've been lucky, I think, in some of the ways of having our own distillery, because we can do as we like. You know, we can make a decision as brothers and owners of going, actually, we want to do this, so we're going to do it. And we're the type of people that do that. So actually, if we're really into something, we'll just do it. And I think one of the things we've done, and it's maybe where some of the industry might want to go, is when our dad died recently from MND, he died a couple of years ago, we went back and looked at his farming book for the last 60 years. And we've gone back and looked at all the barleys that he grew, and we're now seeding them and we're regrowing all of them. So we'll have heritage barleys going back to whenever. And when we're releasing whiskies in the future, that will be in his honour, because actually that's what he did in his life, but also it's part of the evolution of Scotch whiskey, because those barleys will have been grown for the industry at certain times. And I think things like that, again, are, you know, going back to how it was done in the past, because, you know, the kind of field to bottle or farm to bottle thing we are doing is very much what was done in the past. So you're going back to real sustainability. You know, you had the recycling cows on the farm anyway. People had distilleries that farmed for a good reason, because the crops were there to be able to distill things. Lots more people lived in those units. So I think it's almost going back to the past and learning from that too.
And perhaps relieving that little bit of pressure on receiving things from all around the world, because it hasn't been an easy year to get things from A to B.
Because I think you obviously go to the sources that are the easiest to get them, because we can source anything from anywhere. But actually that may not be the best for your environment if you can source as much locally as you can do.
It is interesting though to have conversations like this, because you realise, you know, there's a real benefit to talking about what you're doing and where you're going, and how that influences change. I mean, I've had the pleasure of speaking to your distiller at Arbikie, Kirsty. I was having trouble with our footprint. I couldn't thing, and I realised that you'd had already produced a footprint for your gin. So I just sent her an email and said, look, can you advise me on this? You know, do you account for your biogenic CO2? And she kindly told me, no, we don't. You know, like as in like it's not part of the process. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that you can just know. It's about sharing information and helping people along their journey to understand this process, because it's something that I think not a lot of distilleries, although it's becoming more more talked about and more done. Like, I think what you're doing at Arbikie and Cardrona is still quite new. You know, there's still quite a lot to learn, and there's still a lot to achieve.
No, absolutely. I think it's particularly in that when we were lucky to work with Abertay University and James Hutton in terms of the P gin, or the P and vodka gin that we did with Nadar, but also the carbon assessments that the likes of Trinity College Dublin were doing, and Bangor University, and those kind of pan-European projects that were going on in terms of legumes. There's so much expertise there, but as you say, it's very much cutting edge and brand new. But actually, we're not going to keep it to ourselves. In reality, that's public information, but also you also want to help the industry move along. So hence, of course, we're more than happy to share the information, because actually you want everyone else doing the same. Because the more premiumized product we have as an industry, the better, I think, personally, because you're concentrating on the best rather than being average. And I think, particularly in the sustainable space, I think it's a point of difference. And I think that, that will apply to all of us here. It's amazing what everyone's doing.
Yeah, likewise.
Because I think we're probably only telling half the story as well, because we're probably all very, very busy at the same time.